know Erik Risser. He's been with us before, and it's such a pleasure to capture all of his intelligence and insight and his long expertise as a very gifted conservator. How lucky is he to work on such masterpieces. Conservation, I was just saying to him, is my little holy grail here at the museum. As you may know, we don't have our own conservation department, which is something we really hope to remedy in future. In our new building, we're actually building a conservation lab for the first time. And we'll be seeking funding to be able to hire a conservator. And as you know, it's just so essential. Every day things happen. Every day things that you don't want to happen. And having to have a consultant come in at the last minute, trying to find the right person for the right area of specialization is always very anxiety producing. So, it's something that's so vital, and, for our discipline, having an understanding of material objects is such a wonderful and essential part of what we do as curators, but also in the history of art. So, I can't stress enough how much I've learned from people like Erik and continue to learn from conservators. It really changes your whole relationship to the study of the history of art. But with that, Erik is actually going to talk about a lot of other things that we don't know about, but somewhat related to our own Hermes, on whom he worked exclusively for a very considerable period of time to get him to the incredible state at which you find him now at the Getty Center, where I hope you'll go and visit him on a regular basis, as he seems cold and lonely. It's interesting, too, that when we were talking about the Aphrodite head and completion and incompletion and the joining of disparate parts in the past and their unjoining, it turns out that the Tampa Museum is going to do a small exhibition around their Aphrodite body, for which they'd like to borrow our Aphrodite head. So, it continues, right, this game of completion and imaginative recreation, and this time they're hiring a contemporary artist to do a very interesting kind of interpretive take. But just with that, I want to give Erik as much time as possible. You have the schedule now worked out for the rest of the year. Charlie Stuckey is coming to be the last speaker. We also will be featuring Roberta Smith as our star speaker, as a Curator's Choice lecturer in May. So there's a lot going on, and I hope you'll be able to join us. But Erik is the Associate Conservator at the Getty Villa. He's published very broadly. Hopefully we can carry his book in our own store so you can buy a copy for yourselves. But he also has worked on such a broad variety of material, and he's going to talk to us about how those techniques that he has used in the restoration of something like our Hermes can come into play at archaeological sites. Okay, thanks.
Is this on? Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So it may take me a little while to find my feet, but I have a lot to say, and I've got a ton of images. I hope I can get through most of them. I do want this to be informal. I don't go from a script. I basically throw a bunch of images and I narrate over them. If you have questions, I would prefer if you can hold it to the last, but if it's truly, truly pressing, I'm happy to try to address it in the moment. With that said, what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to try to focus down on Santa Barbara Hermes, and specifically his time, his place, and the techniques used in his historical restoration, the implications to conservation, how to some degree, not going to walk through the treatment, but how we did arrive at the decisions we made to conserve the piece, and then sort of broaden that spectrum that we lay out with you to then look at historical restorations in the 17th, 18th century in general, and then how that has informed, if we have time, the work that I've done on the site. So basically, when I have to step into the point that they found themselves in the 17th and 18th century in dealing with the primary source, so dealing with something as it's come down the ground, knowing the type of decisions that they made, what decisions that I can make that are similar or different to achieve the same aims, but with a different approach. So with that said, the frontispiece here is where I wanted to start. This is here's the frontispiece from the posthumous catalog of Bartolomeo Cavacetti here, one of the best known noted restorers of the 18th century in Rome. I love illustrations like this, first of all, because they give you a direct view into that time, but specifically into the practices that have informed very much how we interact with ancient art. When we interact with sculptures or ancient art in general, but particularly sculptures, because they're big and they're fragile, oftentimes we have a lot of interference from antiquity, but also from their deposition in the ground, and more specifically from the time from which they've been discovered up until today. So these are not simply artifacts of antiquity. They oftentimes are artifacts of a very broad spectrum of time. How we choose what we display very much will change how someone interacts or someone interprets a piece. So something that seems to be a minor decision actually has potentially very major repercussions. So what we try to, as much as we can, is understand the context in which these pieces are found and how they've changed over time. So what you can see here is a view into his studio. As you can see, all of these finished statues that have been restored. These are not things that he's simply creating ex novo. These are actually ancient statues that he's altering for a market. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. You can see a head laying here. You can see someone carving away. What I love is you see these. These are actually pointing machines. So they can actually lay a grid over a piece and then actually from this triangulate specifically to a surface. You can make a copy off to the side. So little things like this. These are, some degree, it's a Pontil machine. We use something similar today. Of course, now with digital scanning, that's dying out. But this was a common practice for millennia. So with that said, Santa Barbara Hermes. So this is a picture of the front and the back after it had been conserved most recently. So if you were to go down to Los Angeles, if you do want to do that, this is the condition in which you will find him. Much different from the condition with which he came into the studio, which is what you see here on the left. This here is an ancient sculpture, but really what you're seeing is an ancient sculpture that has very much been the reinterpretation of what they were intending in the 18th century. So the last time they made a major, non-reversible alteration to this statue. This is what they intended as it came out of the studio, such as this here, for the market in England. This is the condition that time, unfortunately, gave it. Some mistreatment, but also, quite honestly, a lot of what this is that the materials that they're using in the 17th and 18th century in restoring is not stable in the sense that we understand it today, or the materials that we may use. They were using the best that they knew at the time, using the techniques that were cutting edge. The thing is, over time, things change, things alter. So is it fair necessarily to display something that has been altered by a restorer, but is not in keeping anymore with what they were intending to do? In essence, it's almost like putting a painting on display that has changed color dramatically from what the artist originally intended. Excuse me, think of the Sistine Chapel. With that said, you say these are the pigments he intended, Michelangelo, this is what time has done to it, but a lot of people really hold on to that time and say this actually is more authentic than if we were to get back to the original. At least there you have an original, very little restoration, and then changes with time. When you're talking about something like this, you have a lot of alteration. So it's a lot trickier, the decisions that you have to make as to how do you arrive at this state. It isn't as simple as saying, oh, it looks like this, I'm going to make it look like that. I cannot step into the realm of fantasy when I'm doing something here. I have to base it on hard methodology and on practical realities. If I cannot answer certain questions, I cannot do certain things, like put the fingers back or portions of the genitalia. All right. So with that said, we're going to talk a little bit about the Hermes, about his history. His history is representative of a lot of sculptures that you will find in most major museums throughout Europe and, quite honestly, in North America. He was part of the Lansdowne collection, which was, I believe, sold off predominantly in the early part of the 20th century, but it was a major collection. But he was one of three major collectors that were happening in England at the end of the 18th century. The 18th century is really the apex, particularly the latter part of the 18th century, of the commerce or the trafficking of ancient sculptures into Northern Europe. There really was a very ready-made market for reception, but there also was a very ready market of things that were being excavated and then made ready for market. All of this circles around the Grand Tour. We've all heard of the Grand Tour, we've all read Ian Forster novels, Room of the View, things of the nature. It's a very romantic period, but the reality it was really about social status. So you had a lot of very well-educated, incredibly wealthy gentlemen, particularly from England, who had a lot of money. To show that you are of a certain status and of a certain education, you are going to go on the Grand Tour. The Grand Tour consists in essence of traveling for months, sometimes years, down through France, into Italy, and if you were really wealthy or really adventurous, maybe down to southern Italy, you usually didn't go further south than Rome, and potentially on into Greece. Most people had a very standard itinerary of Venice, Florence, and Rome. Rome being the true place where everyone wanted to end up. And it happens to be, of course, because it was the ancient capital, full of antiquities that are ready to hand, that then people want to take back with them to England. As different from today, if we were to excavate something, we have no problem saying, here is the ancient object, and we will put it on display. At that time, the concept was, you have something broken, you must fix it. You're not going to put something broken on display in your home. And that's what these were for. These were not to put on a pedestal in a museum for all to enjoy. This is for you to put in your house to say, I'm an educated person. In essence, these are really expensive souvenirs. Okay? But they're souvenirs that are very much saying, this is who I am. I have the means and I have the education to have undertaken this trip, and this is what I brought back. Now, if we're talking about value, monetary value, which is how a lot of people tend to associate, at least superficially, with art, this was, at the time, the most expensive antiquity in England. This was 600 pounds, okay? That is a lot of money in the 18th century. The most expensive antique or ancient piece of art in England, and also for that reason, was seen to be the best piece of ancient art in England, even better and superior to the Elgin marbles, so the Parthenon marbles. They actually held this piece up to say the Elgin marbles are inferior in value and in artistic expression to this piece here. Some of that's a little unfounded, but with that said, it is a stunning piece of ancient sculpture and a stunning piece of 18th century intervention, and to some degree, trickery. In that way, it's very representative of clients, dealers, and the grist that grinds between those two things. All right. So this is Gavin Hamilton. There is no musical about him yet. There will be, but he is a very major and important person in this time period, but quite honestly, not to be speaking in hyperbole, he is a very important person to art history in general, Western art history. Thomas Jenkins, Gavin Hamilton, kind of the two big figures, because these are the individuals, there's the intellectuals based in Italy who really are the middlemen between the people with money and prestige in England, and they're dealing with the people who are taking stuff out of the ground, taking them into restoration studios. These are those guys that are basically playing both sides. They're the in-between men, and by doing that, these are the tastemakers. The tastemakers that now have gone on to form the major collections of most major European institutions. So he sold to Lord Lansdowne. A lot of his sculpture collection, Thomas Jenkins and Gavin Hamilton. Gavin Hamilton in particular is responsible for most of the Lansdowne collection. But you have the Townley collection as well. They did that whole collection. That is now the sculpture collection of the British Museum. You go to the British Museum and say, look at this. One guy's collection from this time, from this gentleman right here. He profited handsomely, but at the same time, he knew exactly who to deal with on both ends. He was really the mover and shaker. Thomas Jenkins, shall we say, was the man who really knew how to glad hand everyone. He's the guy who knew who to pay and who to talk to. So he's responsible for the finding, not just the restoration of the Lansdowne Hermes, but the finding of it as well. So he would actually go out, and he would pay farmers to dig in their fields, and he would pay people to dig them. And then he would work through Jenkins with the Pope at that time to say, we want a dispensation to be able to export this out of Italy. So he is believed, or not believed, we know from his correspondences to Lansdowne that he found the Lansdowne Hermes and what they call the Lansdowne Marcus Aurelius in a fine site called Tor Colombado, which is in the outskirts of Rome, which is predominantly where he was excavating. He basically said, here's the center of the ancient world, I'm going to dig all around it. And he found a lot of stuff. This is near Tor Colombato. This is better known as Hadrian's Villa. So pretty good place to go and stick a shovel in the ground. Just another view of it. This is a massive sprawling complex. This would be maybe a 20th of the size of the site. It's huge. Now, of course, he's not digging in here. He's somewhere way over here, digging in someone's field. And he's finding things like the Lansdowne Hermes. Now, this is Lord Lansdowne. Lord Lansdowne, of course, spent £600 to buy one piece. It's a lot of money. He is a man of means. But why is he buying these things? He's buying it for his new home in the Tony neighborhood of Berkeley Square. So if you still go to London today, this is one of the most posh areas, ridiculously expensive. Only embassies, so basically only nations can afford to live in this area. This nice park here happens to be this park here. So the house is right there. So he's building this new house. He did go on to become Prime Minister of Great Britain. But what he needs to do in here is basically when he receives people, he needs to be able to put on display his wealth and his status and his education. So he met the right guy in Gavin Hamilton. This is actually a view of one of the rooms, the mini rooms, inside Lansdowne House. So you can see how sculptures are used and also the type of decorative scheme. So you have very classicizing plasterwork, beautifully done. But you then have here just 4. Imagine from this mantelpiece that you have another 4 over here. So just in this one room, you have 8 full-size antiquities. Ancient sculptures that look pretty intact. Now, of course, ancient sculptures do not come down to us intact. When you go and you dig something up, it is very rare that you find it in one piece. If you find it in one piece, it's usually a sign that it's from a tomb. And then also if you find something in one piece, it's usually a sign of something you need to stay away from. But at the same time, something like this, even in a tomb, oftentimes will not survive intact. Basically, time and the laws of physics are not that kind to us or to them. Okay? So the nature of the material that these are made from simply does not generally allow these things to preserve intact. Add into the fact that most of the time these have fallen out of use. So let's say they were originally displayed in a niche in antiquity, they would have fallen out. Things don't tend to do very well when they fall several feet and they weigh several thousand pounds. But at the same time, the nature of marble doesn't really allow for loads to be point loaded on it. So it's not jarred generally. So if you look at something like this, you have this massive piece of drapery, but you have a little piece right here. See that? I know, maybe a little hard to see, but that's a return, right? So the idea is gravity is working on us all. It's a constant. It's happening since time immemorial, and it's always the same. When you have a piece of marble, gravity is working through it, but stone only works well in compression, right? Does not work well in shear, does not work well in tensile. So you will not see something like this in a piece of marble because the arm will simply break off. Okay? You will not see an arm hold a massive piece of drapery like this because it will simply break off. You can do that only if you put something like this, which is a return, back into the greater mass of the body. So it takes the gravitational force and it puts the load back into the part of the stone that can actually support its weight. When you think about it, it's like these are, another way of thinking about it is like a large building. You only cantilever a roof out so far, right? You have to put a pillar underneath it. It's very much the same idea. So a lot of these, here in particular, that's pretty risky. There's no supports back here. Now, one of the big misnomers about ancient art, not only the fact that they're heavily altered over time, is the fact that we know most sculptures from marble. This is wrong. We're talking about this sculpture here. This is a 2nd century AD copy of a mid-4th century BC original. 600-year difference. So somebody in the 4th century BC made a sculpture that looked like this. And it was still popular, so popular 600 years later, that people are still making copies using pointing machines like we saw on that first slide, right? The thing is, the original probably did not really look like this. Take away the tree stump, it probably take away this, a lot of this right here. It probably looked something like that, but it was a little more dynamic. It probably had a little more pizzazz to it, what they call a Praxitelean curve. See that S curve? very typical of that sculpture. A lot of people, when they see that, they say, oh, this is from Praxiteles, one of the few known artists that we know from antiquity. The thing is, the Greeks, who are the originators, the Romans are the industrialists. If you want to break it down very simplistically, and I do buy into simplicity, the Greeks loved bronze. The Romans loved marble. The reason being is marble, as we all know from kitchens, bathrooms, and such, is readily available in the Italian peninsula. Greece has Pentelic marble, but it's heavily flawed. It doesn't allow you to necessarily express yourself in the same way. Bronze allows an artist to express himself how he wants, when he wants, he or she, want. In the sense that if you want to do this in a bronze, you can. We all think about bronze as we see even out here just behind the museum. Any type of pose is possible because the material has the tensile strength to do it. It's lightweight, and you can do this, and you can take it forever. Do that with marble, it can't take it. There is an inherent flaw in the material for what you're trying to express. So the Romans knew that, and that's why they started doing things like this. Okay? It's always funny how people walking through the woods, where they always have a dog with them. They always have something when you look at marbles. Well, that actually is probably not part of the original artistic composition. That is a necessary evil to allow these things to be able to stand. You have all of this weight, all of this mass, through the smallest part of the sculpture. So what's going to happen if any type of force comes from the side? It's just going to break at the angles and fall over. So by putting this, you're basically ostensibly taking the center of gravity and you're lowering it down to about here. But you're also now putting the greatest amount of mass as low down as you can get it right about here. And lo and behold, where does it break? Where you shift from your greatest mass to your lesser mass. Right here and right here. So if you look at all of these types of sculptures, and this is a known sculptural type, it's a Hermes, they all are broken right there and right there. Every one of them. Okay, so it's physics. You can't really mess with the laws of physics. Okay, so Hamilton, Tivoli, Lord Lansdowne, Lansdowne House. Another room, and this one happens to show the Lansdowne Hermes. And this is a very early 20th century photograph before the collection. Actually, I believe this is in the process when the collection was being broken up. This is the Lansdowne Marcus Aurelius. So these were found together. These were found in 1771. And we believe that the piece was restored between 1771 and 1773. We say that because basically the money was handed over in 1773. I don't think someone's going to pay for something they haven't received. So the restoration happens at that time. It's a pretty long restoration. Some of that has been done to justify the price. 600 pounds is very expensive in that time's money, but also in relation to other sculptures, which one later I'll show you, also from the Lansdowne collection. When I tell you the price, it's astronomically different. So this was an incredibly expensive piece of sculpture, and always perceived and sold as such. And a lot of it was because it was supposed to be ancient, as intact as they come. So this was the showpiece that Hamilton then sold on. So this is the three-quarter views of the piece prior to conservation. The reason why I'm putting this up is I want to show you that this is not what they intended. They didn't intend to have a big yellow leg or to have this look in this way. These are actually later interventions. After the 1980s, it looks a lot worse in the 18th century. This is probably at some point in the 20th century as well. It's plasterwork around here. But say like this here, or see like this line here, those are all, or this dot right here, I know that it's not huge, and we'll get into details, but these are all suggestions of restoration that would not have been visible at the time that this was done, and probably for a very long time afterwards. They spent a lot of time trying to match new with old so that you couldn't tell. They wanted it to appear intact. It wasn't this idea of here's the ancient, and here's what we've done to then kind of complete the ancient. I have to carry that burden today. I have to be able to tell you visually, this is original, this is non-original, or this is original, this is historic, this is me. Okay? I can't add my today on. But they had no qualms doing it. That was the standard of the time. The thing is that this will have changed over time. So what you can see is not actually what they intended. So is it actually fair to some degree to leave something in this state? A very compromised state from antiquity and a compromise from historical intervention. This is sometimes what moves people to actually decide to undertake this. And it's not a small undertaking to conserve something like this. Fortunately, in this statute, I didn't have to take it all apart because there was sufficient stability structurally. This is a preoccupying in that that's already been replaced in the 80s. They would not have, they would have put something in there. So whatever was in there did fail. That, you sort of reverse engineering, you understand this failed, or it had something go seriously enough wrong that it had to be replaced. Now when you take half the equation out, is this portion here now stable enough to do the job? Fortunately, yes. I did have to go into the back of the stump and reveal the large clamp that was in there so that I could actually seal it to prevent it from corroding. But I didn't actually have to pull it out. It was still serving its function structurally, unlike some other cases where hopefully I'll get to a little bit later. Okay, so this actually is the first illustration that we have of the Lansdowne Hermes. So 1771 it's found, 1773 the money's given over, so we assume in those 2 years that the restoration has happened. This is 1835. And he's included in this catalog of the Society of the Dilettanti, i.e. well-heeled men, still exists today. He exists because it is considered the great example of antiquity in Britain. But significantly, what this shows us is what it looked like. Okay? This is very important because as I went to find out, as I started doing the work, the levels of intervention and what they actually did, this shows me, not only gives me somewhat of a roadmap, but more importantly, it shows me what is now missing. Okay? Whereas I might find some physical evidence of it. Okay, there was a finger here, but what did the finger actually look like? I don't know. And as we all know, finger gestures are pretty important. So, what you do here can change a lot of meaning, right? But this actually shows me what they had there. Because again, if you look back here, that's all lost out. And then also he really has kind of this, just a very large thumb. But here he's kind of doing this, hang loose. So this then does help me understand what's going on there. Okay, so here's the piece. Again, I like to show the compromised state because it shows to some degree it's easier for me to understand, for people to see when things change, it highlights what's there. But this is the description based on the correspondence of Hamilton to Lansdowne. And this specifically is what he says about this statue. This statue of heroic size is amongst the most important remains of ancient sculpture and marble ever brought to England, whether for the excellency of the work or the integrity of the preservation, i.e. it's almost all ancient, so it's expensive. The right hand, indeed, with the right leg from above the knee and the left leg from a little below it are restorations, okay? And the trunk of the palm tree has been added. So based on this description, this is what has been added, okay? So, excellent preservation. Ooh, that's a lot of work. And we all know that what's expensive is not so much the materials, it's the man hours, right? You got to justify 600 pounds, okay? The left hand broken off has been rejoined, but all the rest is entire except a very small portion of the tip of the nose, which is there, which has been well restored. The ancient polish is entire and unstained, and the tint of the marble is of a beautiful, mellow white, verging towards a waxy tone. Okay? So this is, according to the description, and basically what he said to the owner, and what kind of went on through posterity. Literally up until about 15 years ago, this was to some degree believed to have been how this piece was restored. The reality, though, is this. This is the 18th century. Okay? Everything you see in yellow is what they actually created special purpose at that time. Something like this, pretty standard. They call these tasselli in Italian, basically wedges. Where we have a little bit of a drapery breaks off, they'll simply regularize that, put a new piece on. So finding a lot of these is nothing unexpected. But the reality of a major intervention, you got a wedge, and you've got a large piece of drapery in the back. That serves as support to the weight of the arm, right? And a little bit here of the return. That's not a lot of restoration. So he demanded a high price, saying a lot of work being done. The reality, no. Pretty clever. The reality of this, though, is because of this wedge. Now, this is put under to tilt the statue back, but this, interestingly, turns out that this is the ancient portion as described by Hamilton. But everything down below is ancient as well. It's just another statue. Now, this tells you a lot. They found a statue that had the leg fall much closer together, okay? My hips are my hips. My hips can't change. They can't go this way or this way. At least the bones, they basically stay in the same proportion. My legs, on the other hand, I can do anything with, right? So here, he's locked in. Down here, from this other ancient sculpture, was locked in, but not if you cut the feet apart. And then you can creep this leg out. So that's what this wedge does. It basically allows you to sync this lower ancient portion with this upper portion. Put it in line. Now that's one thing to do this. Right over here, you can actually see that there's a cut right here. And you can see it better here. Right there. They've actually cut the top of that, so not only have they put a wedge in between, they've then tilted the foot up. What that does is gives you a direct bullseye right up to the back of the knee. So it's showing that, okay, if you're going to create something ex novo from scratch, why do you have to go to that? Instead, really all you have to do is take something pre-existing, split it apart, tilt the foot, done. Another one of the giveaways besides the wedge is the fact that if you really look at it, it is slightly different in scale. But it's pretty imperceptible. So it's pretty clever. But what you see then, of course, is what you have here is an ancient, or it's a pastiche of ancient sculptures. Okay? You have at least two. He's not just using the lower portion, he's also using an arm and some drapery. Now again, you can kind of throw those on, mix and match. This is just a nude male. Pretty common in antiquity. You know, if it was something very specific or a very specific type of figure, this may be a little bit harder to do. The fact that you have simply a nude torso, you could add then any male legs below, as long as they're in the same rough proportion, you can get it to work. Incredibly astute in terms of being economizing. Okay, why cut this from scratch? You gotta take that big block, you gotta work it down, you gotta refine it, you gotta make it legit in style, i.e. the 17th century, as good as they are, 18th century, sorry, they're not gonna make something that looks like this. Because again, we're coming out of Baroque, what is considered how people have figured out how to render fingers, toes, all of these things, are not quite the same as they did in antiquity. It changed in antiquity as well. Again, these are often dating points. 2nd century hands, eyes, hairdo, such things. But what you can do here is take something that's roughly in date and put it right in there. Pretty smart. And you still get 600 pounds for it. Even better. I don't know what the actual artisan got for it, but the dealer got a lot. I guess not a lot has changed. Now, we're fortunate in that what they did here, as we understand ancient sculpture today, these are types, okay? So we always like to think of everything being a masterpiece, a one-off, a unique. That was not antiquity. Again, this is a 4th century BC original that we know through a 2nd century AD copy. So the fact that it's being copied means there are many of them out there. It is a type. At the time, this was, I believe, being sold as a meander. We have that wrong. But we now know it to be a Hermes. The reason we know that is this piece right here. This is the so-called Farnese Hermes. This is in the British Museum. It is the exact same sculpture. But fortunately, he has his attributes. So we know, it's actually a Hermes. Importantly, he is intact. He's not broken. Right? He does have a Paseglu there, but he's not broken. So this shows, different tree, right? That's also a giveaway that that's another sculpture. Because palm tree, palms, athletics, big tree. This is probably from an athlete, not a Hermes. Hermes, athlete. Meet each other, they're happy. But this iconographically is not correct. You do see it, but basically it's a repurposing of something else. It's odd that you have the palm tree. It can happen. There are outliers. Maybe a buyer said, I really like palm trees, please give me a palm tree. But here, it really is probably they're using a different statue type. So here, this shows you probably more what you would expect. Now this is a Dresden piece. Lo and behold, he does have that. But he is, again, broken. He may just be an ancient piece where you can see is heavily restored. They tended not to use the base of columns as bases in antiquity. And that's exactly what that is. This is actually the Vatican piece. Look at that break. Exact same place, right? Does have the palm tree. This is important because this was a known piece at the time that the Santa Barbara Hermes was found. 1771, this is already in the Pio Museum. Okay, so it's more than likely that they said, aha, we're going to base our restorations off this piece. Looks just like him, let's find something just like that. Okay? What's significant about that is, again, this is really not art historically, or shall we say archaeologically, that incorrect. Okay? You can get into all sorts of trouble when you start mixing and matching body parts, because you can start mixing metaphors. And that then goes on down through history of us saying, oh, well, that is depicted this way. That's why it's important to understand that this is actually an 18th century intervention. Here, this intervention is not far off from what we now know to be a standard body type. That is this. So you see, they didn't miss the mark that much, right? What about, now we're going to step out of the prism of the Hermes and step a little, and kind of broaden it out a little bit. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a little premature in saying that. So, what he is basically is an ancient pastiche with the 18th century and here the 1980s that allows him to be an ancient statue and an 18th century conception simultaneously. That's what's important. When you put something on display in a museum, this is an ancient statue, and the label will say it's an ancient statue, but it is an 18th century conception of an ancient statue. Okay? It's important to understand. They have added the 18th century on, and it's better actually to say they've subtracted the 18th century in the sense that what they're doing to slice these pieces together or put these in is irreversible. It is very intrusive to the piece. It's something that I today cannot do, standing here as a conservator. Now, we use the word conservation. I call myself a conservator. The fact is, this is the tradition we are born from. Okay? We are one and the same. We've just simply adopted a code of ethics. That means we've changed our name by changing our practices. We have two main tenets that really set us apart from restorers previously, who would do something like this. Once you remove something, you can't put it back, right? So, first tenet, we used to say reversibility. Everything we do has to be reversible. Now that's pie in the sky, honestly. But anymore, we sort of refine that to say anything we do has to be retreatable. Okay, so if I do it, you should be able to undo it with really minimal alteration to the ancient. The original is all important in how it's presented, but also it's sacrosanct. I cannot take it away. I should not be whacking surfaces off. If I have to do something, I do only that which is necessary to ensure the stability of the piece and the longevity and preservation of the piece moving forward with as little alteration as possible, i.e. minimal intervention. Those are the two tenets that call ours, that basically hold up the word conservation and differentiate it from restoration. That will become important if we have time for me to get into then some of the work I've done in Turkey. But, so again, simultaneously ancient, 18th century. So ancient with the 18th century imposed. Okay? Here's the piece. The conservation that was done, based on, again, what was the original conception of the restorers. Physical evidence, the primary document, most important. And then the comparanda. These two things put together, starting here, moving here, and then moving further afield, allowed me to arrive here. Okay? Because some people would say, how can you do that? How can you do that? How can you do some of this? Well, I can do that because of this. And I can do that because looking here, I can see, all right, how this drill mark is where it peters out. Okay, to get a drill in there, that means there was something here. There wasn't something here. Physical evidence, and the comparanda to say this is actually what the hands look like on this body type, and this is actually what the restorers did. I can make those type of decisions in this case. Not always. Because here again, they weren't too far off the mark. And importantly, he didn't get changed a lot from this 18th century to 2015. That's not the case of this statue here, which is another one I worked on several years ago. This is from Dresden. Call this the the Dresden God or the schizophrenic, whatever you want to call it, because, as hopefully will be self-evident in a moment, this piece had a very different fate than the Lansdowne Hermes. So here again, you see some of that one. You see a column base being used as a very convenient base for a sculpture. But this is an ancient core, and it's a lot more intact than the Hermes. It's what they did with all of the appendages that made a huge difference on this piece. They made it a massive headache as to how to display this piece. So here, again, I want to note intact. Shouldn't tell you, big deal, because that very rarely happens. But on this piece here, this is actually the first known illustration. Okay? You recognize the body. Okay, different here, but what they've done is, in essence, restored some of the toe. This is actually all later damage. Some of this is restoration, but this piece actually was taken by the Soviets after World War II to Moscow, and was eventually repatriated to East Germany during the 70s, and was actually in a train derailment. So it exploded. It's basically sat in a warehouse for 3 decades until we basically said, we'll go ahead and take that on, clean it up, put it back together. With that said, it had all its parts, but then we were really much raised, had to raise this question of how do we actually display this piece? Because here you have Statua di Alessandro il Grande, Alexander the Great. So, beautiful nude, somebody in England, or wherever this actually was, the Duke of Saxony, ended up in Dresden. This is actually done a century earlier than the stuff we saw in Lansdowne. So this is 17th century, not 18th century. The techniques are the same. He said, I want an Alexander the Great. So I want an ancient statue made to order. This is actually the head and helmet that you see here. 17th century helmet, ancient head. Happens to be the head of Athena. So you put a female head on a male body, although it's pretty androgynous. And she happened to be a warrior. She wore a helmet, so it's a ready-made fit. Pretty easy again, economizing. Put that on top. You got here, and all you got to do is now put in, all you got to do is make an arm. And I have Alexander the Great. And stick a spear in my hand. Pretty easy. Easy money, right? This is the same statue. Now, he's Bacchus. Now, he's Antinous. So in the space of 200 years, he has 3 identities. Alexander the Great, Bacchus, change the inclination of the right arm, put a patera in it, just change the head. Here, take that off, because really what you're seeing here is this is the rise of archaeology. This is somebody saying, I would prefer a Bacchus versus a Alexander the Great. Just nicer. I prefer drinking rather than great military heroes. And here, this is archaeological. Somebody says, that body is actually Antinous. He's the lover of Hadrian, right? His favorite. Drowned in Egypt. This is a statue that was diffused throughout the Roman Empire. That's what that is. So you see the rise of scholarship, art history, and important archaeological. You start figuring out, when we saw those 3 examples of the Hermes, same thing. That body, that's an Antinous. So they got a copy of an Antinous head from the British Museum and stuck it on. And it actually, if you look, scale's right, it does fit. Problem is, when you go put it on display, how do you do it? Is it Alexander the Great, is it Bacchus, or is it Antinous? So here, this is literally what we had to come up with. This is the ancient, fortunately there's so much of it, we simply left off the accoutrements that were interchangeable over 2 centuries. But we weren't as lucky as we were with Santa Barbara, where in that instance, it was the original restorer's vision that was recoverable through the physical evidence, through the illustrations, and through the comparanda. Here, the ancient we have, and that's all we could stick with. Fortunately, there's enough of it so that it's actually something that's compelling to look at. One of the things that I love about this piece is we're talking about how they rejoin, and we will be talking about that in more detail. See this? How deep that is? It's beautiful carving. It's because this is actually done in 2 blocks. That's an ancient joint. Very, very clever. We don't often talk about how they join these pieces in antiquity, because again, a statue is usually a big block you carve from. And that's also why you don't really want to do this with marble, because of course the block you have to start with is huge. So you tend to do it here and then just insert the arms. Here they're actually showing that they're using different blocks. It actually goes right through here, the joints. It's only visible on the back, but again, this was put in a niche. You never look at the back. And in the front, the only way that it would first give away was where they carved right between the legs, they actually punched through. So you had a tenon and a mortise, right? So this is the mortise. There's a big tenon in here. Where they carved through, they punched right through the tenon. So you're like, wow, that's really deep. Oh, it's so deep they actually went right through the stone. So it's very impressive. It's very well hidden. You would actually never know that it's there. Okay, so we've established that they can have changing identities, the grand tour and the like. This really is what we're talking about. Okay, this is the Townley collection what they're depicting here. This is the British Museum's collection. This really looks like some fantastical Gothic vision of what a learned man. I'm sitting here with my book. I'm learned. My trusty dog at my feet. And I look at my collection. I can sit here and ponder about ancient art all the time, right? Another depiction of the Townley collection. Pretty overwhelming, right? You think, yeah, right. Somebody's just showing off. I've got a Titian, I've got a Raphael, and I'm just looking at the paintings. Let's go down to the sculptures. You know, you've got a flaying of Marsyas, Cupid and Psyche. This is the Venus Genetrix. These are all very well-known statue types. Nice copy of this over his castle, by the way. So, fantastical, right? Nope. This is Ince Bundle Hall in Liverpool, another major collection of ancient art. This is what it looked like. This is what it looked like in the 1920s. Another room in the same hall. So these paintings are not fantastical. They're real. These collections were not insignificant. They were massive. And then again, they were done scholarly, but really it was, you know, look at my wealth, look at my education. And with that said, that whole market, you know, you have obviously the buyers, the dealers, but you have the people who actually realize the work. Now these are some illustrations that are from Corradori. So these actually predate everything we've seen today to this point. But it's still very valid. And why these are, again, I love historical illustration because they show you so many, it's all the devil's in the details. This is the Dying Patroclus. This piece is actually in the Louvre now. But I love you can see how they actually move pieces around. Okay? How they heated things or crushed things back here. It's probably from the handles, probably a heating element back here. How they lifted things. Beautiful corkscrewing on that. But significantly, it's this. This is what I want to draw your attention to. That detail. What he's doing there is regularizing a break joint. Again, statues don't come out around intact. They come out broken. If the head is missing, and I'm going to put a new one on, am I going to carve something and then try to mate a very irregular surface? That's very difficult to do. I'm just going to smooth that surface so I can just stick a headlight on real easily. So again, it's economizing, right? Getting a maximum for a minimum. Take an ancient sculpture, or in this instance, make it a lot easier to mate with. And that's what you see happening here. Every one of these break joints, they're basically going to flatten, all right? That's the evidence you see here and here. Somewhat different. This is Tassagli, but this here is very much that same idea. Things don't break in very regular lines, right? That's a pretty straight line. That's a nice gradual curve. I don't know anything that breaks that nicely. That's because that's what they've done to it. So you can expect, when you're reading here, that's ancient, that may not be. That may be ancient, that may not be, or vice versa. So looking for things like that, as they get told to you by the fact that something's discolored, will help you sometimes to start at least figuring out where to start on this piece. To figure out the puzzle of what's ancient, what's not, what type of intervention's been done, and what really needs to be undone. So again, more Corradori illustrations. Here you see that they're drilling a piece. They're preparing it for joining, which is what you see here. I love the drill, the fact that they have this support on the wall that allows them to drill something straight. So you're hand drilling, a little hard, put it up here, you're in business. Down here, you see that they have a large pin. Now this is where we're going to start really talking about the difficulty of these pieces. Okay? When they're doing things like this, that and that, it's not reversible, right? Something that we're very hard pressed to do today. Love to do it, it's easy, but can't really do it ethically within reason. And then this, importantly, is the materials they're using, which we know are unstable. That's why they've changed. That's why they've revealed themselves. And in many instances, is why these pieces start to fall apart. This is all important. But look down here. Just the details, the drilling, the pinning, but that piece down there, the sculpture, regularized surfaces, drilled holes, and just a random head sitting off to the side. So he's told you everything was looked at right here. Pretty cool. Here's the whole industry in a small detail off to the side. Now, let's look for that evidence on the Hermes. We'll come back to the prism of the Hermes. So you were here last year. I love this slide, so I figured I'd include it again. So the right arm prior to conservation. See these? Okay? Let's make them a little more obvious. Those are all joints. Okay? Pretty regular, right? Again, things don't break like that. Now, some of these are ancient. So, it's just not simply a restoration. It's, again, ancient to ancient. But again, as long as you have enough of it, you can trim it to make it. But then you also have these weird things like his elbow. He really needs to wash better. Something up here. You have something right there. So it's pointing them out, right? See these little odd circles? Right? Let's call them out even further. These are actually access points to the interior. So this is how they actually put these pieces back together. So what you can expect behind that is that you have basically an access point to the hole where they actually be joined, where they pinned it. So in that, you're going to find a pin. So each one of these joints, of course, can be bridged. Your pin's going to bridge that. So you're joined and then pin on either side, but that hole has to be done. But this access point, why that's important is what they're actually doing is they put these together and then they introduce something in a liquid form. Okay? And then it sets up inside. It's brilliant. The problem is, how the heck do you get that apart? Because what they're using, this is looking at the one on the hip, nicely concealed, beautifully done. It's lead. Put a big iron pin inside, pour a lot of molten lead in there, and it sets up and then solidifies around that pin. It's stuck together, and it's not coming apart. Problem is when that starts to rust, split your stone, or when it starts to not hold its load correctly, it starts to sag just ever so much. That only accelerates and it compromises the stability of these pieces. But how do you get it apart? They didn't design it to come apart. Again, a major difference from restoration to conservation. Reversibility. So when I am going to do something like this today, on a sculpture, or on this piece, I didn't on this piece, but on another, reversible. Okay? So this is just a detail of what you're seeing. Look at that. Hand forward diamond, lead, and this red substance you see here is the early form of superglue. Okay? It's what they call colophony. So it's basically it's pine sap. Now, oftentimes introduced in a molten state, poured down in there to sort of pre-coat that to make it receptive to the lead. Sometimes the lead, you pour it in and it doesn't actually make it into its target. Well, how are you going to undo that? Now the piece is still sloppy. So if you're doing something like this, preheat the hole. Oftentimes they mix sand into this to keep it refractive. It keeps the hole warm and therefore receptive to the molten lead. That's the weak link of this, and that's what you have to go after. Lead is not something you can dissolve or burn out. This, fortunately, we can go after chemically. As you can see, coating, lead, iron. If you're lucky, the lead will completely encapsulate the iron and therefore seal it. It tends to look more like this. That is not cut. That's simply the lead didn't go all the way down. So really, that piece was held together just here. But imagine if you had so much more lead, how hard that is to get at that. This is colophony on a regularized break joint. It's a restoration piece. Nice rasp marks. But you can see how flat that is. What's significant about this colophony with pine resin, look at how much mass is in there. Okay? That's significant when you actually go to treat these pieces. They can't just simply, we think about super glue or most glues, a little goes a long way, right? You can glue yourself to an I-beam and hang up there, right? Not with that much. Because when you're having this much, it's really, an optimum bond joint is about this. When you put it like this, the weak point is actually here at the resin. And that's oftentimes why they had to rely on him doing the work. This was just sort of something that allowed them to fill so that then they could do an aesthetic integration on top of it. But this is significant because this is how they start mating things, and importantly, how they cut to make those things. So when you go to conserve something like this, this is a space that once you take it away, you have to recreate. can't now, if you take this arm off and it has that gap there, I can't now stick it right back on. I have to back it off that gap and still make it stable. That's a trick. All right, and then sometimes plaster. That's a lot of plaster, okay? Pins, plaster, restoration pieces, regular joints, ancient. There's a lot going on. This is once you remove a lot of those larger pieces. This is what you end up with, okay? Large staple, embedded in lead. Here's your joint. Staple goes to either side. All the different pins to put all those different pieces on. Round, square, iron, colophony, lead, smorgasbord. All really tough. But significant because we're going to talk a little bit. This is just out of one portion of a 18th century restored statue. Look at the number of staples, all the different types. And look at the number of pins. You even have a little bit of brass. Right here, and I believe in here. So that also sometimes can show you your different times of intervention. All right, so you've seen that a lot of statues coming out in the 17th, 18th century, they're restored, so they can be passed on to clients. Now, these are pieces of art. As we've seen, they're subject to change on the whim of the client, but also on the whims of fashion. Okay? Art is fashion. These pieces often reflect that. This is the Hope Hygeia, currently on display at Los Angeles County Museum of Art. This was purchased, or was actually restored in the late, so about 20 years later, in the Lansdowne Hermes. This was sold on to Mr. Hope in England with the Hope Athena, and then both of these were actually purchased in the early 20th century by William Randolph Hearst, and then donated in 1950 to the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. This is actually how it looked prior to sell. This is how it was put on display until 2008. That's a big difference. Now, if you remember the Hermes, some of his fingers were missing, there was some discolored things. It doesn't look that bad in the 20s, right? Even though she's actually outside, what happened? What happened are people, curators, conservators. In the post-World War II period, the 50s and more specifically in the 60s, in Europe, 70s in the States, because we tend to be a little bit behind that curve, postmodernism happened, okay? People said, these are ancient statues. I want to see the ancient. I don't want to see the 18th century or the 17th century because they can be a woman's head on a man's body. They're not right. The ancient, purist, gotta see the ancient. Okay, let's strip them. That's what you end up with. Okay, like the Dresden God, somewhat intelligible, You look at it, say, all right, it's a woman, she had a snake, okay, it's actually Hygeia, basically gives us the word hygiene, Sleegus' daughter, the snake is a symbol of healing, but she has this really amputated look to her, doesn't she? When you start regularizing surfaces, they look a little funny. They're not break joints anymore, so sometimes it's not quite right in your head, And you watch a movie, all those decisions are made for you, right? You go to the theater, you have to have a willful suspension of belief, right? You don't see the walls, you don't see the machinations. Well, here, this is your willful suspension of belief. You never quite arrived at that, sort of saying, oh, I see what was there, it's ancient, and I love it. All I see is this. I just see everything that had been done to it. And I don't appreciate the original piece. In the worst case, this is the Lead and the Swan. This is now restored 25 years after the Lansdowne Hermes. This is how she looks today. This is how she looked until the late 90s. So when you take that zeal of stripping, you can end up with something like that. Do you understand that? I understand it's a woman because she has breasts. That's about it. I don't know what this is. What is this? At some point we actually thought this was appropriate. But what this is a cautionary tale about what it is we do. Reversibility. Reversibility, okay? But when they did this in the original restoration, they didn't make it reversible. So the sad part is when they stripped a lot of these, you lost the 18th century in terms of the stone. You're left with all the negative or bad evidence of the 18th century, and none of the good stuff. There were a few enlightened few that actually managed to preserve or still warehouse the pieces they stripped off. But oftentimes it is such an intensive process to take something apart that they simply shattered those pieces because they didn't design them to come apart. Now here's the Hope Hygiene as she came into the studio in 2009. So you can see, 18th century, it was pretty heavy in the center sections, particularly here on the left. Now, this is what you end up with in the script. Fortunately, they did preserve, this is an 18th century arm. This actually is ancient, okay? But you see all this in gray? This is all 18th century that's been lost. It's been broken and shattered. So I had to do similar to the Hermes. I had to recreate all this in modern material, okay? I want you to pay attention to those, okay? All these pins, tips of fingers, thumbs, all of that. So again, fingers on statues, not new. But imagine that this was all originally done in stone, like the snake. But all these pieces now, that's part of the neck. These are all portions of the drapery, and of course, significantly the left arm. I had to remake those. But I've done them in such a way, see the hole, see the pins, that it's now fully reversible. I will put these in place, if I can, purely mechanically. Screw it in, screw it off, okay? I want this to be one big IKEA piece of furniture. If I have to, I will put a tiny bit of resin in there. A reversible resin, non-toxic, readily available, anywhere in the world, solvent, you simply apply, gone. What I'm trying to do in that process of focusing predominantly on the mechanical is to separate, to segregate chemical from mechanical. That's what they did not do before. Pin and holding it together, right? The colophony. They started intermixing those. And it's very hard to take them out and target what you need to. So by separating those, as I've learned, you can target exactly what you need and therefore make things reversible much easier. So you can end up, here's her with all her integrations put back on. So you can see she was very heavily affected on her left side. Fortunately, she's very monolithic, so it was really only these pieces out here that really suffered. But you can see the de-restoration in many ways was far more traumatic than when she was broken in antiquity. And this, of course, is after full conservation. And she's one case. So that is when the zeal of people, of changing of art and fashion, we said, let's strip them. Let's go to the ancient. Hopefully we'll never repeat that mistake. But quite honestly, you know we're going to. So at some point, we're going to go back to that. We're going to find that to be important. You know, history does repeat itself. The difference is, this time, to get to that, will take you about an hour. Okay? And you won't have to shatter all of that. Literally destroy history. Isn't that sad? All right. Well, you learn from your mistakes, right? Now, the other instance in which many times these types of statues have to be conserved or dealt with are here. Now, from this point on, I have to apologize for the quality of the photos. Not these here, these are historic, but all the photos that are related to the work that I did. It looks like I was a prisoner in East Berlin in the 60s. Some of these are pre-digital. They've been scanned, and so the color is a little funky. It's like something out of Starsky and Hutch. But the information's still there. Okay, so this is actually an early 20th century picture of Marcus Aurelius. These are in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. So it's a project I did for that museum several years ago. So this is, let's say, 1903. This is 1993. It's actually a little bit later, but some differences, right? Significantly, you see that line right there? This was in a flood. That's never good when you got iron inside of something. You can see any water. That's a water line, actually, where it's blanched this out. But importantly, you can see, well, that drapery's gone, right? Fingers have actually done pretty well. But really importantly, you see that? It's gone. Okay? That's a return. All that weight is now cantilevered. Lo and behold, that joint's kind of open, isn't it? So it's out. This piece is literally starting to fall apart simply from gravity. So this is one of those where, not in the zeal of let's recover the ancient, this is auto-destruction. And this is when your hand is forced and says, I actually have to do this. Minimal intervention in this instance means I gotta intervene. Here's the sign of a staple. You see how open these actually are when you look at them? They're pretty far open. So you're going to end up losing those arms onto the floor. Okay? This is another piece, another Panzer statue. This is Gaius Caesar. So the nephew of Augustus Caesar, who unfortunately died before ascending to the throne. But again, 1903, 90s. Some differences here. The fingers didn't fare very well. But really important on this one, look right here, and look right here. This one is leg failing. So this is actually worse than the other one. The arms are kind of falling off, and his knees are okay. Here, literally, his knee is actually gone. So what's going to happen right there? See that slide? This piece is actually just going to end up on the floor in a matter of time. So in both these instances, it was, all right, something needs to be done here. And when you start, it's a rabbit hole. Because this is shown right here to not be stable. The problem is if this isn't stable, that means this isn't stable, this isn't stable. So you slide real quickly into full de-restoration. But unlike the others who were blowing things out, we have to do it now being respectful not only of the ancient, but of the historic intervention, because we know this is now a significant history of this piece, and we are going to put it back on. So what that entails, so here's the Marcus, here's the Gaius, is a very slow, torturous process of taking these pieces, reversing something that is not designed to be reversible. So getting into very tiny joints and literally cutting the moment so that you can actually get to a pin and undo it. That's what you see actually happening here. This is like a prison break. Days and days and days. So very slowly cutting through colophony to actually get access to a pin in some way. I can't actually cut the surface of the 18th century or of the ancient. So I really have to be very slow with what I'm doing. And this is a big day. You can actually get in there and take a piece off. But a sculpture like this breaks down into about 150 to 160 pieces. That's a lot. It's a lot of work. It can take you a year, up to 2 years to take something apart. Here, for example, so you get it apart, still got your pins in there, right? So I got to cut the pin, take it off. Now I got to get that pin out. Swimming, if it's in lead, I got to cut that lead out. If it's swimming in an ocean of colophony, I'm happy, but still, it's pretty, got to use solvents to go after that and still go mechanically. And then what you see me doing here is, in essence, drilling a hole in the pin so I can tap it and pull it. So you can see just the amount of colophony that's around that. It's god awful. But on top of that, all of this, you see all that? I still have to clean these pieces. And we talked about reversibility. The one thing that's not reversible anymore is cleaning. So it's one of those things that you have to really do with a tremendous amount of caution. Particularly when you're looking at things like this, that they're done in different stones. And they've been patinated, or they've been altered to try to make them look uniform. When you take them apart and you start to clean them, of course, the true nature of the stone is going to be exposed. So that is a real trick as to how then to put them back together, but also to make them look right. Putting them back together, I have to utilize all the damage that's been done. I'd love to just drill the holes in line. The thing is, how they did a lot of those, they drilled massive holes. You put small pins in proportion to the size of the hole. And then the volume is filled up, of course, with your colophony or lead or both. What that means, though, oftentimes, is that for a single joint, your holes are going to look like this. Okay? They're not going to look like this. They are using straight pins, but it's a huge hole. So the bullseye is this big. Anymore, for me to do these things in a reversible way, say what we're seeing here with feet to the upper portion, one, I've got to suspend this and I've got to immobilize it so that it doesn't move. And then here, I've got to be able to bring this up to it. But I have to utilize all these holes that are at different angles. And I have to make all of these pins, not here, because again, we're a separate spatial relationship. Once I get up to the hips, everything has to be in line, right? But here, I have to be in line with gravity. Those have to be perfectly parallel. When you step into the realm of two, you got to be parallel. If you do this, the toe in or the toe out, you're keyed. You can't bring the pieces together, but you can't get them apart. So, not reversible, right? So I have to spend a lot of time basically doing all of this in acrylics, where I start with acrylic rods, I bend them with heat, and I figure out how I can actually get these perfectly parallel. And then in the tops and in the bottoms, I'll put tubes, females, right? So it's a pin and a sleeve. I'll put sleeves in the holes up here, so those are receptors, the pins, and down in the bottom, so the pin is dry. I can actually, if I need to, I can glue in the sleeves, because again, it's a big hole, in a way that you can simply pull the sleeve and collapse in the resin. But that sleeve gives the orientation for these pins, as they have to be bent, but to keep them perfectly parallel. Okay, and then all I have to do, now the mechanical's there, later the statue, nobody's going to come and lift that off without special equipment. All I have to do is put a little tack of resin in there. It's together. It's also for the reversal. This is just the same statue as you can see. Once you get up in here, all of this has to be perfectly parallel. But all the paraphernalia and all the trial and error you have to go into then putting these back together, because significantly, remember, all that colophony in there, they never actually touched. So you have to figure out that exact spatial relationship of where these things sat to make it work. Marcus Aurelius and the guys. All right, so I believe that is the first part. It's a lot. Does anyone have an appetite to go on a little bit, see a little bit of work that I'm doing in Turkey? Good. Is that all right so far? Yeah.
Press F5 over the big again.
Sorry?
You press F5 over the big screen.
You got it? Okay. All right. I have a lot of slides. I'll move through these a lot faster, okay? Sorry. This is more typical of what you would expect when you're pulling these things out of the ground. Again, these things do not survive impact. They're not standing on top of the podium when you excavate them. They tend to have fallen down or been intentionally vandalized. And then if you can imagine the tons of pressure that is put on from the earth surrounding them on top of them. This is actually a pretty good state of preservation. Most of the time they're actually much, much worse. But this is more typical, somewhat representative maybe of what they were finding in the 17th and 18th century. And this is a picture somewhat recent that you can see things are never going to come out in one piece. Okay? Large tetrahedron, leg and tetrahedron, those are somewhat missing numbers. These are actually finished edges, but it's the idea that things come out in pieces. Okay? So I've had the good fortune for some time now to be working in Turkey in my summers. And I work at a site that has a ridiculous level of preservation, which is why I enjoy working there. And when you go to Italy or go to Greece, Italy is it's a beautiful country. Medieval, Renaissance, Baroque, and some ancient. You go to the Forum and such. But for the most part, what made places attractive for people to settle in antiquity is the same reason why they're attractive for people to have stayed there historically. They had good water sources, agricultural and arable land, and very defensible. But what that means is, in essence, here's your ancient, here's your medieval, here's your Renaissance, your Baroque, and your modern. So to get to this, it's pretty problematic. You want to get to antiquity, you hit the medieval, you're going to piss somebody off. It's a medievalist if you blow right through his level, right? And by the time you get down here, again, you're under so much history that things tend to be broken or hard to extract. Okay? In Turkey, it's very, very different. Because the idea is that you had an ancient culture, the Greeks and the Romans, had many before that, but the Greeks and the Romans was primarily what we're talking about here. And then that then transitions into the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine. Right? And the Byzantines basically are kicked out by an invading force from the East, who have very different traditions. Now those different traditions are very important, because they don't want to live in the same places where those other people live. They brought in a nomadic tradition, a pastoral tradition whereby they don't want to live in high defensible places, they want to live down on the plains. So what that means is in a place like Turkey, you have incredible preservation because people didn't build on top of what was there before. And importantly, not just building on top of it, they didn't say, like say the 18th century restorer, oh wow, I need to build my house, let me just take the foundation of this building and put it over here. That's what tends to happen in most other places. Somebody spent the time quarrying and cutting that stone, why not use it? That didn't happen in Turkey. So what that means is most of your archaeological sites have an incredible level of preservation. They simply were allowed to erode and for Mother Nature to cover them up. And you don't have spolia being pulled out and reused. So in this site in particular, I'm not going to give you a site tour because then it really would be a long talk. This is a very high altitude site. It's right underneath a mountain range. And therefore the erosion happened very, very quickly. The site was abandoned almost instantaneously because of an earthquake. So the earthquake actually caused most of the built structure to fall down. And importantly, it disrupted the water source, and therefore that's why people abandoned it. What that means is, like Pompeii or Herculaneum, which were flash frozen, okay? This was almost flash frozen. You know, basically, people ran away, and then the top of the mountain went within decades. So you have a level of preservation, 2, 3, 4 stories. And if you think about that, that doesn't exist. You go to Pompeii, it's beautiful. That's one story. Okay, those were fields that people were plowing, so they were basically knocking down the stories over the centuries. Go to Herculaneum, it's under a much harder stone. You've got full height of ancient buildings. It's pretty rare that you get the full height and the level of preservation, which you do in Turkey, and at this site in particular. Now, at this site, there are a lot of different monumental public or civic features, particularly fountains. And what I'm going to show you right here is actually was a statuary group associated with an nymphaeum, which is a fancy word for a fountain, right? Place of the nymphs. So if you can imagine that you had basically a large water basin, and behind that you had a series of niches, and each one of those niches, like in the Lansdowne house, you had sculpture. Okay, and those were on a theme usually related to water. Well, because of the earthquake, those pieces fell into the basin. A lot of the fountain, when you think of the Trevi fountain, that falling on top of the sculptures, that was in essence what was recovered when we excavated the fountain. And this is the number of boxes of sculpture to make up 5 sculptures. Okay, so we're talking about things that had recognizable pieces, but that were shattered into thousands and thousands of pieces. But what this presented me with in this instance was knowing everything that we just talked about. What do I do now? Because I'm in the position that they were in the 17th and the 18th century of the primary source that I now have to put together. How am I going to do that? Knowing what I know. And importantly, how am I going to do that? Knowing that in the future, somebody is either going to find more of this, and therefore I have to facilitate it and put in, or somebody's going to say, I want to make a change or a difference. So what can I do to actually make something that is as stable as can be, but is reversible as can be? Okay? So these are the recognizable pieces of all those sculptures. And we're going to talk really about 2, right? But I'll walk you through the third one, which is the simplest one, sort of the idea of pinning. Okay? I did have to pin these. Okay, so I did have to drill them. I did have to do something that was irreversible. I don't know if some of you followed what happened at the Met a few years ago when they had the Renaissance sculpture that fell off the pedestal and the like, and it shattered, and they spent years studying what to do, and in the end they decided simply to glue it back together, not pin it. So a lot of people will ask me, well, but they didn't pin there, but that's a very particular instance where things were broken down into tiny little slivers, so it really didn't make sense to then try to put a structural pin into a larger mass. Here, I simply can't do that. Not only that, this isn't the Met. This is the wilds of Turkey. So one of the things that you have to design around when you're doing this is, what will the potential future, worst case scenario, of this piece be? Is it going to be moved around, as we know these things are? Is it going to be in a non-environmentally controlled space, i.e. it's going to get really hot, and really cold, really moist, and really dry? All of those things are going to work on this. They're going to interact on these pieces. So I have to design for that and basically say, let's imagine that this piece is simply left to its own devices. I have to try to make it survive. So with that said, it's a very primitive setup, but we're going to talk initially about this piece here. It's a large Rubenesque Venus, okay? But in essence, she's a big column. She had 1 piece, 2 pieces, 3 pieces. 3 pieces, you stack, big and robust. This is where I could sort of, the idea here was that I was actually teaching several Turkish conservators about how an approach to how they can actually put together statuary of any era, right? This is basically a methodology that can be repeated and tried, or not tried, but repeated no matter what the heritage, right? So the idea here was I am going to have to pin these because these are going to be picked up. They are going to be moved around. And they're going to be in non-environmentally controlled areas. Significantly, most resins that we use today in conservation that are reversible, they have what's called a TG temperature, a glass transition temperature, right? That is a fancy way of saying that's the temperature at which they get soft, okay? Most of the ones that we really like, that are really reversible, they get soft at around 104, 105 degrees. That's not very good for something that's in the wilds of Turkey where it can get 108, 109 in summer. What that means is, put it together, it'll melt. In the sense that put it here, then it'll go. So, within a year. So you gotta think, okay, the resins I'm going to use, they're going to have a higher glass transition temperature, still be reversible, but they still may get pushed. They may over time start to creep, do what they call a cold creep, which means allow for that. So they're being acted on by gravitational forces, slowly alter and change. That's where the pinning becomes important. Okay? But now that I am going to have to pin, I'm going to try to minimize the amount of material that has to be removed. And I'm going to be clever because I'm going to say it's for scientific reasons. Okay? So anything that I remove, I'm going to pull it out in a core. I'm not going to pulverize it so that it can go off to a laboratory and then actually come back and say, here's the core. Here's your marble source. That helps figuring out ancient trade. Is the marble local? Is it brought from 300 miles away? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there are justifications that I have to lay out. I just can't sort of walk in like a cowboy and start shooting from the hip. Got to come in with a methodology and say, I'm going to do it this way, and this is why I'm going to do it. But once you're committed, this is how we're going to do it. So the idea here is, now we're looking at basically right here. Okay? I'm going to drill these two holes. But again, together, they got to be parallel, right? How do you do that? How do you do something in the field and make it reversible? Now, I've seen a lot of terrible things done in the field in the name of expediency or lack of budget. And I have to say, in both of those instances, I don't buy it, okay? I've spent my career working in institutions and working in the field, and they are diametrically opposed. But I learned something here that I can use here and vice versa. That makes for a certain agility that I believe that you should be able to achieve museum quality work in the field under extreme time limits and under severe budget limitations, and vice versa. You shouldn't have to take 10 years to do something in a museum environment. So they both are very much hand in glove, one influences the other. The idea here is, okay, these are going to be my departure points. Okay, this is where I'm going to drill. Now here, you can see where you have these lines coming out of the 90. The idea is what it's allowing me to do is to extrapolate my starting points to the external surface. Okay? So in essence, it's allowing me to look inside the sculpture as I'm predicting where that pin is going to be, right? Because ideally, again, a bond line that's ideal is this, not this, right? So I could drill a hole like this and put a pin like that in it, like they used to, but that's not doing minimal, right? That's doing far more than I really need to do. And not only that, it's not achieving the greatest structural stability. So what I want to do, if I have a 1-inch pin, I want to be doing a 1-inch and say a 64th hole. That's it. That's my tolerance. That's my slop I'm allowed. And the only way to do that is to try to be as predictable as can be when I'm drilling. So here, my departure points, I extrapolate to the external surface at a 90. And then what that allows me to do is then use the one constant that is drawn all the time, gravity, and then draw these lines, right? So I can put that piece up on top, and these lines are now on the outside, and I can throw a level on there and go. So here's my X, this is my Y, now this is my Z. My Z is in line with gravity. If this is in line with gravity, this one will be in line with gravity, right? I'll have two perfectly parallel pins. Beautiful, that's what I want. This is where you see what I've extrapolated out. Here's your break joint. And again, on a regular surface, I can throw a level, and I can actually draw that line on the top and the bottom, which means I can drill them separate. I'll be starting at the same point, and I'll be going in the exact same direction. Okay? So again, don't be horrified that I'm drawing on a pencil and pieces prior to cleaning. Okay? All right, so here's after a core is done. Now, I am being a little bit clever. We do core them, but the first thing I'm going to do is actually drill a pilot. So you see that little nipple right there? I'm going to go ahead and core these. Again, here's my lines. So the idea is that if I start drilling on that starting point, I have somebody over here looking, I have somebody over here looking, and they can say tilt, so they can tell me exactly if I'm wandering, so I can get a very specific line of direction, drill that out on both sides, but then all I have to do is basically take some saran wrap or cling foam, wrap some clean clay in that, and then put a few dots of paint, right? Or crayon, whatever you want. So when I seat the top on there, I will drill just a tiny little pilot hole from those departure points, and I can actually see if I've drifted, right? If this hole and this hole end up being like that, again, they need to be right over each other. So you can see the nipple is right in the middle of that. So I know that my two starting points are dead center. Okay? That means then, using these, I can go drill that casually and know that it's going to be in line. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, see how they're transferred? See the pilot holes right there? There's moving my lines of reference. Just to make it a little clearer. So now, I can do both sets of holes, and now they're ready to receive their hardware. All I had to determine was the width and the depth. And then again, put a sleeve and a sleeve, and I have a dry pin. So not too different from what I've done. The difference is I don't have to put in these bent pins. I can actually make straight pins. So like that. So at that point, that's sort of the basic methodology. Now I'm just going to walk you through very quickly some of the images of 3 statues from that, so we can get to the gap again. So again, just the lines. You have your X and your Y, and that's your Z. So again, your dry pins and your sleeves. Just a detail showing the sleeves of the female and the male. And again, see how that is perfectly in line with my external registers, right? Easy peasy, right? All you gotta do is think about it. Okay? So, you see, she's very Rubenesque. She's kind of a big lady. 3, she's just a big column. Okay, now I'm going to get a little more complex. These are the recognizable portions of Poseidon. Okay? Poseidon, because you have the dolphin. Again, remember, the support on those ankles. They're all in antiquity. Here you have the buttocks, and then here you have the portion of the chest. That's it. But we knew it was Poseidon, but the rest of it looked like this. Okay? So you start with your gnomes, and you start building from your gnomes to try to find connectors. Because again, this may sit on there, but it actually didn't. These 3 large fragments, we know belong to the same statue, they didn't join it. So you have a problem of where is this actually oriented? That's what all these are going to tell you, but you got to find them. That's tough. See that? That's what you're working with. Sometimes to make a bigger group, and then that bigger group joins on there. So in fact, look, all of these made up that, and that, and that. That now receives the buttock. Yes. Now I have an orientation. I know the actual spacing off there. Okay? See? It allows me to see the hips. And then importantly, it allows me to then figure out what's going on here. Now, that type of drilling or pinning I was telling you about, which we did using gravity, you can do, again, at the level, the exact same thing, but going perpendicular to gravity. And that's what you see here. So this is actually the front thigh on the right leg. So you have the back of the leg, those pieces, you see all the different pieces that had to come together to then form that which can receive the hips. And then this is the front of it. So doing the same thing, you have your sleeves and you have your pins in your sleeves. So again, easy in, easy out, purely mechanical, a little bit of resin, it'll hold in place. Okay? So that's what you see happening here. That's not going to go in or come out unless those are parallel. Okay? That allows for that. Which allows then, again, one of the things you have to do, as you sort of saw with the Marcus and the Gaius, all those contraptions, I don't have the time to build them there, but I still have to do the same thing. This is all a dry fit, right? So here I'm suspending this, it's sitting there, and then I'm basically sucking this up to that so that I can start figuring out if I have this. So it's all I have to do. It all is a dry fit, so I can do my measurements, do my lines, do my drilling. Okay? That's what gives me that, which then allows me to figure this portion out. And allows me to actually bullseye the back of here and here, so I know my straight line and I again can drill those. And end up with something like this, even though there's no point of contact in between. Okay? And again, the idea is talking about a 30-second at most stop on these holes. Not drilling whacking holes for small pins. Only taking that which is necessary. Okay? So, now that we're doing that, again, recognize this, right? Your Z, the one over here, and your X and your Y. Okay? Set that on, transfers that to the other side, see my drawings. Drill those apart. Now I can actually put that on. And then this actually only joins to the back here, but I was able to simply do it through on that and join it. And slowly build it up. Here you see, once we get to the hips, everything gets hard. These can act as separates, right? I'm just using gravity to help me do that. And once I get here, I have to use it to make everything parallel. So, see that? Perfectly parallel pins, received in sleeves. Down. Moving into the arm, again, now we just want to use those external references to do a proper pinning. see the number of holes that have to be done with the number of pins. It's a lot. You know, we do have to do contractions to some degree, but within reason. Parallel pins into the chest. See, we did the arms separate. So then all I have to do is raise the last bit on, 2 parallel pins. Of course, I want you to see the beautiful lines. Okay? And then there's your fully assembled Poseidon. So from hundreds of fragments. This. Okay? Last one, and this one's not new. It's more complicated. But see, here's that idea. We're drilling. She's saying, look, come a little back. Using that reference point. All that has to do is be in line with your marks. Pretty extensive technology, huh? A pencil, a level, contour gauge, and a drill and a drill bit. So don't tell me you can't. You don't have to buy it. Okay? And that's what you hear all the time. Again, think about it. Think about it, you can do it. You can achieve museum quality in no time. But you have to think about it. And, you know what you're doing. But this is then the Satyr from the same time, the recognizable portions. He had a lot more missing. You know, Poseidon had a lot missing, and I should say, this is actually, his head was intentionally knocked off. Okay? So in the Byzantine period, they emasculated him and took his head off. The Satyr, somewhat the same thing. So here are all the different pieces, and here, you know, again, high technology, buckets and rice. That's what he uses. You know, I have a big sandbox here. Okay, but again, nothing too complex. Here you're just using rice to do the same thing. Okay? But assembling all the different pieces. You can even use those lines, and you can use bamboo skewers to give you that line if you need to. Okay? And this is actually the Satyr as we finish in the season. Now significantly, all of these, that's 1 month. Okay? That's 1 month. Now I wasn't alone. You saw there were other people there, but they've been done 1 month. So you tell me if it works. It works, but I learned this by learning from what I had seen in the Panzer statues and everything else. Now, we move on to, and this will be the end of it, I promise. Now what do we do with those missing areas? Okay, these are archaeological. We can just put them into a museum that way. I mean, we're going into a museum. I hate exposed pins. I really hate them when you go and you see a piece that's on a big pin. I just think it's just a horrible solution. Sometimes it's the only solution. But here, we weren't talking about huge leaps of faith as to what's actually missing, right? Here, here, here. You're not stepping into the unknown, right? We're not going to reconstruct the head. So this is actually what we're going to do. You have a big Satyr, you have this missing and this missing. You're connecting side A to side B, right? You're then looking at the details and sculpting them in, but you're really trying to help with the intelligibility. But the point is it needs to be reversible. I'm not going to regularize that surface with a chisel and then cut another piece of stone and stick it in there, right? We're not in the 18th century. At this point, we're in the 20th century, actually early 21st century, even though the photographs wouldn't tell you that. But this is what you see. So this is Mehdi, this is Medina, Sri Lanka, Turkey. These are 2 people that I was training to do this work. This is the next season, so this is the next 4 weeks. So the Poseidon, let's start with that. Remember those tassetti, all those little patches? So this is kind of the same concept. The idea is these are non-structural fills. So what I can do is take out the majority of the volume with ethafoam, an archival foam. I can literally cut it into the shape inside and pack it in. So all I'm left with is just a skin on the surface that's necessary. And I can then put a reversible resin on the edges, and I can then start working in a resin right there, using like a putty, so an epoxy putty. I can do this. So this is literally a skin. You want to take that out, wick in a tiny bit of acetone, and now you have foam. Pop it right out, now you're right back to only stone. Okay? So that's what you see. Again, I apologize for the quality of the pictures. Actually, this is the season I forgot my camera, so I had to borrow someone's, and that's why it looks like this. But you can see that was done for all non-structural joints, okay? That same approach. This, of course, we did with the holes there. We simply actually put foam in here for the spring, put a pin in here for reinforcement, and then Coca-Cola can. all the way up. So we use that as our mold, okay? Cast it up. There you go, in plaster. Want to take that off? Pretty easy, okay? Now we're faced with the aesthetic integration. I should point out, see up here? That's the tea garden of the whole town. So you have the whole town all day long watching you. So you learn to ignore things, but I tell you, that was a long 4 weeks. Anyway, so you can see some of the fills as they're being painted. And then as they're being toned in. Okay?
Wow.
There you go. All right? So that's not over yet. Still have to do an encore. So the bigger issue, and this is more relevant to what we saw with the other figures, okay? Large missing areas, which in the past they would regularize, right, by simply shading the surface. Well, let's just invert that equation, okay? Let's regularize the surface, but differently. So you can see beautiful stability, just stick wood in there. But you can see that, if you were to, this is often how you would see things displayed in a museum. These horrible pins, but more importantly, he goes like this now. Because his pins, they have a little give to them. So the fills also serve as a stabilizing effect. It's not purely, aesthetics. Here we're talking about structural fills, not the ones where we can actually take out the majority of the volume of the fall. We actually have to try to take the weight here and channel it over a greater surface area, okay? So that you're not just putting it focused right down to the pin, you're actually putting that weight through a greater mass, okay? So what I'm doing here is, again, I put a barrier on the surface, and I'm now using resin to do what? Regularize my surface. I'm not going to cut it, I'm going to add it to make it regular, right? Expensive tool, right? Hacksaw blade, very expensive. All right? Importantly, I don't think you can see it there. You can right here. Terrible picture. You see there? And of course, if you put that in the middle and I put resin, I can't take it off. The idea is I put that in as a divider, so now at the 180, you can take that right off. Okay? Same thing at the top. Now I have a regular joint surface. I can start working. So, got the foam. Divide it in half along that central point at the 180, so I get no keying. Now, rather than cutting a piece of marble and everything else, I'm going to make my dummy in plaster. Right? It's cheap, readily available, and tools to work it. If you know what you're doing, you can do it. So do one side, do the other. Okay? Still have your seam. Now you got to come in and actually shave it, and there it is finished in plaster. Right? Beautiful. But the problem is, if I want to come and do this to it, that plaster is just going to go, right? It's not structurally viable. So I have to translate it into something that is structurally viable. So, but now, I got my 2 halves. Split it. 2 halves. And I make a mold of it, quick and dirty in plaster. I can take that mold, put in a resin skin, so again, high-tech equipment, lay in that skin, slump it in, and then basically put a pin across here and fill it. Now I have resin cast 2 halves. Okay? 1 half, right down the center, tack it in with glue either side, put maybe a little bit there and there, put them together. Now you have this whole cap, right? You have the whole lower part of the leg, not too dissimilar than the Hermes, right? But this time you need to take it off and get it to the interior about 5 minutes. Real easy, okay? Now significantly here, I've refined this technique since I did these, simply because technology has helped me. At the time, I need to put a barrier on these surfaces to allow me to do this. It's not like I cast these in place and leave them. I will cast them and I take them away. And testing reversibility means you actually have to reverse it. This isn't just theory, you actually have to do it. So when I drill those holes, I have to put it on, I have to take it off. I can't just drill it and say, oh yeah, it's great, because the resin sets up. No, it actually has to be tested, okay? Here, the idea is on these barriers. When you get into the verticals, or you get into undercuts, any barrier, and I'm using a very expensive barrier known as saran wrap. You put something on it, it goes, right? That's the problem. So I initially refined that by using like a double stick tape on those undercuts, so then I can put the saran wrap on, so that when I put the resin on it, it's not going to pull it off. It's not just going to sag. It works, but it's a lot of extra work for me to then have to clean that off. But it does work. Beautifully now, they have a new product that's based on, like these gecko feet. They have a type of clean film you actually put on, and through pressure will hold in place. As long as you don't get excessive in your resin, I can do this type of work now without actually tape or anything else. I can literally just do it with plastic and pull it off, which is brilliant. I wish I had it at the time, but oftentimes, again, adversity makes you think about it, right? So here, the idea is that I have to regularize these surfaces, but this one, the break joint is in the shape, it's in a very odd, irregular shape. Again, the idea of something coming in and I can't key it, you can't go past the 90, right? So what I've done, in the essence here, is to turn the two sides into an hourglass. So you have a front and a back that look like this, and the top and the bottom look like this. So things go in, and they come out in the front, and they go in, and they come out in the back. So you have a pitch, right? But each one of those, you can see, based on the morphology underneath, is sliced. So this is almost like a Trivial Pursuit, right? You put them in, you can again undo all of those. But you see, I built a regular surface. That allows me, rather than in two pieces here, based on the complexity, I want to build it in as many pieces as it takes. Okay? And I can pull each one of those out. And each one makes the next one that much easier to do. Okay? Start doing the aesthetic integrations. There it is.
Wow.
Now again, 4 weeks. Okay, so everything that I just presented, that was 2 months worth of work. Okay? I don't want to work like that every day. You're literally doing about, in total we did about 12 months worth of work in 2 months. Okay? But you can see, limited resources, limited time, you can get a museum quality piece. Okay? You guys survived. Sure. If there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. Yes, sir.
Where in Turkey were you? Where's that relative to on a map?
Okay, think of Turkey as a big rectangle. Okay, and so the short edge would be the Aegean. Okay, and then as you come around that corner, you're on the Mediterranean. Just as you come around that corner, there's a big sort of jog in. That's the port of Antalya. So Antalya is the closest large city. It's about 60 miles away. So basically, when you land, you go due inland, so due north towards Ankara, and you go up into the mountains. So again, it's what's called the Lake District of Turkey, because again, I like to be pampered, so I want to be close to water. What it means, though, is that you're up in the Alps Mountains. You're in high mountains, so it really looks like, almost like Switzerland. When you think of Turkey as being very, very dry, and it is, but there are areas of it, the Black Sea, and in that area in particular, where it is very lush. Quite beautiful. Yeah? Those pieces there? Yeah, those are actually on display in the Museum of Budur. So Budur is the regional capital of that area. So you can actually go see them today.
So what does the Getty get at all of this exactly?
How does that work? Well, I mean, first and foremost, there's prestige in having somebody going and doing that. But secondly, again, a lot of the work I did there informs the work I do here, and vice versa. And it's not simply about, this is my job. This really is about cultural heritage. And if you can actually teach, it is a big mission of the Getty through the GCI and others, these initiatives of outreach, of being good stewards of heritage. In my mind, that is being a good steward of heritage, is teaching particularly Turks dealing with culture in their own country. It's one thing for me to come in and do it. I can't be there indefinitely. Even if I wanted to be, I can't be there indefinitely. But two, it's their heritage. So it's right that they take care of it. And it's right that they have the means, and that's really what the point of all of that was, to develop a methodology that is repeatable and is not horribly expensive. It just involves understanding what you're doing, thinking about what you're doing, and then doing it right. Yep.
The parts on the very surface, once you've done all of the mechanical structure to it, how do you color it or paint it or so that it looks like one piece for duty? Do you keep it so it looks like a...
Again, that's always a question of debate. When we're talking about conservation versus restoration, you know, with the Hermes or with, say, the Hygeia, what we're doing there is, it is conservation in the approach of reversibility, but what we're really doing there is re-restoring, in that we're returning it to a restored state, a specific. We could not do that with the Dresden piece, for example, because there were so many. If it's known and is recoverable, we would do that. With the surfaces, again, that's institutional, that's national, how you approach that. It's a spectrum, right? You know, you have antiquities or ancient art is its own, and in my mind, the hardest of the disciplines, simply because the idea of what is original is so important. When you're dealing with a decorative art, for example, you know how that piece was created, why it was created, and its aesthetics, and that is what's all important, is to preserve that. Oftentimes with painting, it's the same. Whether the varnish is actually from the time it was painted is immaterial. It's about having it look the way that the artist intended, right? When you're dealing with an ancient object, it has many different lives. And we cannot curate those lives in the sense, that's what's hard, to say this one is important, this one isn't. We used to do that, and that's why the statues got stripped. We now try to say all of those lives, as much as possible, are valid, and therefore significant, and therefore have to be preserved, unless they compromise the long-term health. Right? So with that, the idea of originality, the original, is always encapsulated. And that comes into then, to get in a very long way, circuitous way back to your question, how you actually aesthetically integrate something. You want something to look good, so people can engage with it and understand it, but you don't want to mislead somebody. Because again, something that's 18th century, I believe very strongly in labels. Labels calling out things. And people should be labeled, you know, and they should, but at the same time, I cannot rely on the label always being. So you always put a tell, or two, or three, or four in there. That will basically say, you know, casual viewers will look at it and say, oh, it's beautiful, move on. Okay? Somebody who's really interested, I'm not there to fool them, but I am there to have them understand the history of the piece and understand that I have been there. But I'm not going to make it obvious. You know, some people, they'll paint it pink. You go to Italy and you'll see ceramic joins, or you'll see sculpture, and they either de-restore them or they will make them the most god-awful colors you can ever imagine, because this is not original. We want you to understand it's not original. The problem is a lot of casual viewers go, I didn't know they had pink back then. Right? So that's a problem, right? It's a problem of how you instruct and educate, et cetera, et cetera. So I believe you should give the tell. So oftentimes what we'll do, traditionally, they will do things that are slightly recessed. Okay, so if this is the surface, this is then the modern surface. It's slightly recessed, so there's a slight step, a shadow line. You'll be a little more matte. You don't want to go shinier because that draws you to it. You want to go more matte. You want to be close in color, but not perfect. Some people even go as far, you know, in Italy there's a thing that they call trapeggio, which is basically using, you're almost painting it in tiny little lines. So your actual individual values may be like blue and yellow and all this kind of shocking, but when you step back, those values read and read. Right? So you'll see it and say, oh, okay, that looks great. When you get up close, it's like, I'm here. Now, it's good, but again, it's down to the skill of the practitioner oftentimes. I think it's easy to make something pink. Okay? I think it's hard to make something look good and still be honest about it. But it's a very fine line. It is a spectrum, and where you fall on it is oftentimes very institutional, very national. So, you know, you have full restoration and you have just bloody obvious, right? I like to sit, not here, but about here. You know, and I think in general that's where we've sat in my time as a field. Some people like to sit much more over here. And that's always this internal debate. And so I hate speaking publicly because somebody will always be like, that's not visible enough, or whatever it may be. But the point is, if it's reversible and retreatable, it doesn't matter. Because again, what I've done, if you want to make it pink, or you want to take it away, be my guest.
Well, thank you so much.